Some people think their future will change when life gives them a chance. But life doesn't hand out chances. It responds to patterns. Right now, in ordinary moments, no one notices. You are either building a future you want or practicing a future you'll regret. Most people are waiting for motivation, the right time, the right mood, the right energy. They believe one day they'll wake up ready. But readiness is not a feeling, it's a result. The person you become next year is not decided by big decisions. It is decided by repeated behavior, especially on days you don't feel like trying. Your future is not approaching you. You are approaching it step by step, habit by habit. And today, we're going to talk about the discipline you're building right now and the life it is quietly creating. People often say discipline is something you either have or you don't, as if it were a personality trait handed out at birth. One person is naturally focused, another is just lazy, and that becomes the explanation for everything that follows. But watch closely and you'll notice something very different. Discipline is not a gift. It is a decision, and more importantly, it is a decision made again and again, often in very small moments no one applauds. You don't suddenly become disciplined the day you feel inspired. You become disciplined the day you stop negotiating with yourself. The alarm rings, and in that quiet moment there is a conversation. No audience, no pressure, just a choice. Stay where it's comfortable or get up and do what you said matters. That single decision looks harmless, but it is powerful because it teaches you something about who is in charge, your intention or your mood. Every day offers dozens of these moments. They don't look important at first. Whether you start the task now or 10 minutes later, whether you finish what you began or drift to something easier, whether you keep your word to yourself or nobody would know if you didn't, each decision writes a tiny instruction in your mind. This is how we operate. And after enough repetitions, the mind stops asking questions and starts following orders. That's why discipline feels difficult in the beginning. You are not just doing a task, you are changing authority. For a long time, emotion has been in charge. If you felt tired, you stopped. If you felt bored, you switched. If you felt bored, you switched. If you felt uncertain, you postponed. Emotion is persuasive because it speaks loudly and immediately. Discipline speaks quietly and asks for patience. One promises relief now, the other promises results later. People wait for confidence before they act, but confidence is usually the reward of disciplined behavior, not the requirement for it. When you repeatedly do what you plan, even imperfectly, you gather evidence about yourself. You begin to trust your own instructions. And trust in your own word is far more powerful than motivation. Motivation can start a task. Trust keeps it alive. There is also a misunderstanding that discipline requires intensity, that it means dramatic effort, long hours, or heroic sacrifice every day. In reality, discipline prefers modesty. It thrives on reasonable promises kept consistently. The person who commits to a manageable action daily often outpaces the one who waits for a perfect, energetic day because the future responds more to continuity than to enthusiasm. Imagine two people deciding to improve their lives. One waits for the right mood, the right energy, the right time. Some days they do a lot, many days they do nothing. The other chooses a small action and repeats it regardless of mood. Weeks pass, and the difference becomes visible. Months pass, and it becomes undeniable. The first relied on emotion. The second relied on decision. One lived by preference, the other by principle. What makes this powerful is that discipline reduces internal conflict. The more you keep your decisions, the less energy you spend debating yourself. You don't wake up asking if you feel like it. The question disappears because the answer has been pre-decided. Life becomes simpler. Energy once used for hesitation becomes available for progress. You may not notice the change immediately. Results rarely announce themselves early. But something subtle happens. Tasks feel lighter, starting feels easier, and delay loses its attraction. Not because the work changed, but because you changed your relationship with it. Repeated decisions trained your mind to accept effort as normal rather than exceptional. So discipline is not about forcing yourself once. It is about choosing a direction and reaffirming it daily. Each repetition strengthens identity. You are no longer trying to act disciplined. You are practicing being someone who keeps promises, and the improbable thing is that the outside world eventually mirrors that private agreement. We tend to overestimate big moments and underestimate small actions. We imagine that someday a single decision will transform everything. A perfect plan, a powerful burst of effort, one extraordinary week where we finally change our lives. But the future rarely responds to what you do occasionally. It responds to what you do repeatedly, especially when it feels too small to matter. A single day of effort feels almost invisible. You read a few pages, practice a little longer, organize a small part of your work, wake up slightly earlier. Nothing dramatic happens, no applause, no visible reward. Because of that, the mind starts to bargain. This won't make a difference. And that sentence quietly becomes the most expensive thought a person can keep. Life keeps accounts differently than we do. We look for immediate results. Life tracks accumulated direction. Every small action places you slightly ahead or slightly behind, and the distance compounds while you're busy judging whether the step was important. What looks insignificant today becomes decisive later because repetition multiplies everything. Consider how easily neglect works. One missed effort seems harmless. One postponed task seems reasonable. One distraction feels earned. None of them ruin anything by themselves, and that is precisely why they are dangerous. They invite repetition. Soon the pattern becomes familiar, and the familiar becomes identity. The future then grows naturally from that identity, not from your intentions. Small positive actions work the same way, but require patience because they don't flatter the ego immediately. You won't feel transformed after one disciplined morning. You won't feel exceptional after one extra hour of focus. But after many quiet repetitions, the mind stops resisting. Skills begin to respond. Opportunities start recognizing preparation, and people often call it sudden improvement, even though it was slow construction. The difficulty is psychological. We are emotional creatures living in a world governed by accumulation. Emotion wants a noticeable return on effort right now. Accumulation promises a meaningful return later. The person who learns to respect delayed results gains an unusual advantage. Because most people abandon the process before it begins to pay interest, you are always practicing something. If you practice delay, you become efficient at postponing. If you practice attention, you become capable of depth. The mind records behavior with remarkable accuracy. It does not judge whether the behavior is helpful. It simply strengthens whatever is repeated. That means the smallest action is never neutral. It either trains progress or trains avoidance. There's a quiet power in modest consistency. When you decide that a small task will be completed regardless of mood, you remove drama from improvement. You no longer depend on feeling ready. You become reliable instead of reactive, and reliability attracts results because the world trusts patterns more than promises. Many people search for a breakthrough when what they need is a continuation. They stop and start, surge and rest, waiting for momentum to carry them. But momentum is the reward of steady motion, not the cause of it. The wheel turns because it keeps turning, not because it once turned fast. Over time, these small actions reshape how you see yourself. At first, you are proving something to the future. Later, you are confirming something about the present, that you are the kind of person who finishes what begins. That identity changes decisions automatically. The question shifts from should I to of course I will. You may never remember the individual days that built your progress. They will feel ordinary and forgettable while you live them. Yet together they form a direction strong enough to carry you where occasional effort never could. And what once felt too small to count becomes the very thing that counted most. Comfort has a quiet voice. It never argues loudly, never forces you into obvious mistakes. Instead, it suggests reasonable delays. Rest a little longer, start tomorrow. You've done enough for today. And because it sounds gentle, we rarely question it. We accept it as kindness toward ourselves. But comfort has a cost, and the bill rarely arrives immediately. What makes comfort dangerous is not that it feels good, it's that it asks for almost nothing in return right now. The mind naturally prefers immediate relief over distant reward. So when effort meets resistance, comfort offers an escape. Skip the hard part today and deal with it later. And later seems far away enough to feel harmless. The problem is that later is not empty. Later has weight. Every avoided effort is simply stored, gathering pressure until it demands more energy than it ever required at the beginning. The task you delay grows heavier, not because it changed, but because time added consequence to it. Think about how easily we justify small indulgences. Just one missed practice, just one unfinished plan, just one evening spent drifting instead of building. None of these seem serious. In fact, they feel earned. But comfort works through accumulation the same way discipline does. Each small surrender teaches the mind that avoidance is acceptable, and soon it becomes preferred. People often imagine failure as dramatic, a sudden collapse after a big mistake. More often, it is gradual comfort. You don't notice it while it's happening because nothing appears wrong. Days feel normal. Life feels manageable. Yet opportunities quietly pass because readiness never formed. And when a moment finally demands effort, the strength to respond hasn't been practiced. Comfort makes promises it cannot keep. It promises rest without stagnation, ease without consequence, delay without difficulty. For a while, it seems honest. You feel relaxed, unpressured, free from strain, but freedom built on avoidance is temporary. Eventually, reality asks for payment. In urgency, in stress, in regret, and the price is always higher than the original effort. The person who repeatedly chooses ease believes they are saving energy. In truth, they are borrowing energy from the future at high interest, because tasks delayed rarely disappear. They return combined, urgent, and heavier than before. What could have been handled calmly now demands intensity. On the other side is a different kind of discomfort, chosen discomfort. The decision to begin before you feel ready, to continue when progress feels slow, to face effort while it is still small. This discomfort feels unfair at first because the reward is invisible. You pay today and receive nothing noticeable, but you are not paying for today. You are reducing tomorrow's burden. The remarkable thing is that effort shrinks problems while avoidance enlarges them. A difficult conversation handled early is simple. Avoided long enough, it becomes conflict. A skill practiced daily becomes natural. Ignored long enough, it becomes intimidating. Life rarely punishes instantly. It compounds patiently. Comfort also reshapes expectations. The more you protect yourself from difficulty, the less capable you feel facing it. Not because you are incapable, but because you have trained on familiarity. The mind begins to interpret effort as danger rather than growth. Soon, even manageable challenges feel overwhelming. Yet the opposite pattern builds resilience quietly. Regularly facing small resistance teaches proportion. You learn that effort is temporary, that strain passes, that persistence works. What once seemed exhausting becomes ordinary, and what once required courage becomes routine. So every day presents a subtle trade, a small discomfort now or a larger discomfort later. One is immediate but brief. The other is delayed but multiplied. The choice rarely feels significant in the moment because both options appear minor. Only time reveals which one carried weight. Many people wait for a serious reason to change, a moment dramatic enough to justify discipline. But by the time urgency appears, comfort has already accumulated its debt, and debts collected by time are rarely negotiable. One of the greatest illusions a person can live under is the belief that doing nothing is neutral, that if you don't clearly choose a direction, life will somehow hold you safely in place until you decide. But life does not pause for indecision. It keeps moving. And if you are not deliberately steering, you are drifting. And drift always follows the strongest current, not your highest intention. Design requires thought. It requires sitting down with yourself and asking uncomfortable questions. What do I want? Who do I need to become? What habits support that identity? Drift requires nothing. You simply respond to whatever appears. A notification, an invitation, a distraction, an opinion, and slowly, without realizing it, your schedule fills with reactions instead of intentions. The tragedy of drifting is not immediate failure. It is gradual surrender. You begin by postponing clarity. You tell yourself you'll get serious later, you'll plan later, you'll commit later, but later becomes a pattern, and patterns quietly become lifestyles. When you don't design your day, someone else will. Employers, trends, social expectations, endless content streams, they are more than willing to occupy your time. They do not need your permission to influence you. They only need your lack of direction. And once your hours are claimed, your energy follows. By the end of the day, you may feel busy, even exhausted, yet strangely unfulfilled because the progress was not yours. Design is intentional living. It is deciding in advance how certain hours will be used. It is knowing what matters before the world begins demanding attention. That does not mean rigid control of every minute. It means clarity of priority. When you know what matters, decisions become simpler. When you don't, every option feels equally important, and equal importance leads to scattered effort. Drift feels harmless at first because it carries comfort. There is no pressure to choose, no responsibility for outcomes. If things don't work out, you can say you never really committed anyway, but that safety is deceptive. Because while you avoid responsibility, you also avoid authorship. You cannot claim a life you never intentionally shaped. The person who designs their future may not have all the answers. They may not know exactly how the journey will unfold, but they have chosen a direction, and direction, even imperfect direction, builds momentum. Small efforts align, decisions support one another. Progress may be slow, but it is consistent because it is guided. Drift, on the other hand, creates contradiction. You say you value growth, yet your time supports distraction. You say you want excellence, yet your habits protect convenience. The conflict drains confidence. You begin doubting yourself, not because you lack ability, but because your actions lack alignment. There is also a psychological difference between chosen effort and accidental effort. When you choose a task, you approach it with ownership. When it is imposed by drift, you approach it with resistance. Ownership energizes. Resistance exhausts. That is why two people can work equally hard and experience completely different levels of fulfillment. Design requires courage because it forces commitment. Once you define a path, you must accept the trade-offs. You cannot pursue everything. You must say no to certain comforts, certain distractions, certain expectations, but saying no to what does not matter is what gives power to what does not matter is what gives power to what does. Most people do not fall short because they lack talent. Short? Because they never decided clearly enough to organize their lives around a purpose. They hoped circumstances would align first. They waited for confidence to appear. And while waiting, they drifted into routines that shaped them quietly. You are always moving towards something. The only question is whether that movement is intentional or accidental. Design places you at the helm. Drift leaves you at the mercy of current. And currents are indifferent to your potential. People often look at someone successful and call them lucky. They see the visible result, the promotion, the business growth, the transformation, and because they did not witness the private process, they give it a simple explanation: luck, timing, opportunity. But what appears sudden is usually the final layer of a foundation built quietly over time. Consistency is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It does not announce attention. In fact, it often looks boring from the outside. Doing the same useful actions day after day lacks excitement. There are no big headlines in repetition. Yet repetition is where strength is formed. When you show up consistently, you create predictability in your own behavior. You no longer rely on emotion to carry you. You build systems. You create routines. You decide in advance what will be done, and then you let repetition do the heavy lifting. Over time, this reduces friction. Starting becomes easier because starting is no longer a debate. The interesting thing about consistency is that it compounds silently. The first few efforts seem to change very little. The 10th effort still feels ordinary. Even the 20th may not attract attention, but somewhere along the line, the accumulation begins to show. Skills sharpen, confidence stabilizes, output improves. And because others did not see the incremental growth, they interpret the visible improvement as a sudden leap. What they call luck is often preparedness meeting opportunity. And preparedness is built through consistency. When the opportunity arrives, it does not announce itself in advance. It simply appears. If you have been showing up regularly, practicing, learning, refining, you are ready. If you have been inconsistent, even a great opportunity can slip away because you lack the structure to support it. Consistency also builds trust, first with yourself, then with others. When you keep small commitments repeatedly, you begin to trust your own word. That internal trust changes posture, tone, and decision-making. You move differently because you know you follow through. Others notice that reliability. They may not know why they feel comfortable depending on you, but they sense the pattern. Many people chase intensity instead of consistency. They work extremely hard for short bursts and disappear. They are impressive for a week and invisible for a month. Intensity can produce temporary results, but it rarely produces stability. Consistency, though less glamorous, builds something that lasts. It creates a rhythm that sustains progress without exhausting you. There is also a quiet confidence that grows from repeated effort. When you have done something dozens of times, fear decreases, uncertainty fades. You stop questioning whether you can handle it because you've handled it before. This confidence is not loud. It does not need to prove itself. It is grounded in experience, not emotion. The world tends to reward patterns. Employers trust dependable workers. Clients trust steady service. Audiences trust creators who show up regularly. Relationships strengthen when presence is consistent. In nearly every area of life, reliability outweighs occasional brilliance. And yet, consistency requires patience. It asks you to work without immediate applause. It asks you to believe in accumulation before it becomes visible. That can feel lonely. It can feel unnoticed. But that is precisely why it works. While others are distracted by quick results, you are quietly building capacity. Over time, the gap widens. What felt small becomes substantial. What seemed repetitive becomes mastery. And when the results finally surface, people may describe them as fortunate. They may say you were in the right place at the right time. But you will know that the right place was reached step by step, and the right time was prepared for long before it arrived.